Hello, everyone. You are getting a special wet hair Stefan today because the clocks change in America, something I was unaware of, and so I thought the stream was starting 45 minutes from now. It also means we're a little late. But now, here is me and Ben for Philosophy for the People, and we're going to be talking about atheism and theism again.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually just checked. Apparently, your clocks change in a couple weeks. It looks like there's a
So we can be sure to get that one wrong too.
yeah, exactly. It actually changed the next time we're going to do this because I do I'm going to be gone next Sunday. I'll be traveling, so it's the Sunday after the 26th that they change. But yeah. So yeah, the essay this week is a follow up, conveniently enough, to the essay the previous week we had to miss about Christopher Hitchens's debate with William Lane Craig. So the first part from 2 weeks ago was called "Hitch and the Philosopher," um, and it was kind of about how badly I think Hitchens, uh, how revealingly I think it comes to kind of a lot of what was wrong with New Atheism. Hitchens dropped the ball in his debate with this philosopher of religion, William Lane Craig, and then the one today follow up is called "My Dog Isn't an Atheist, But I Am." What Christopher Hitchens should have said to William Lane Craig, and you can find all of those at the Philosophy for the People Substack, which is benburgess.substack.com.
And this is very relevant because the things you're suggesting here don't just apply to some debate which happened in 2009, but are very relevant to to the degree that matters at all. The kind of online debate culture between atheists and theists, which, while not as being as prominent as it was before, is still a very, very active community, which in that time has developed like a very interesting subculture, which holds to various kind of weird truths, apparent truths, which kind of, in your view and in my view, I think, inhibit them from actually taking the argument to theists.
Yeah, exactly. I think one interesting thing about this is that I am old enough to remember. I don't know, old atheism, I guess. But I'm old enough to remember being around atheists before new atheism was a thing. I only went to one meeting because I ended up deciding it wasn't that interesting. But I remember going once to this college meeting of a group that called itself something atheists and agnostics, and that's interesting, right? Because they were making that distinction. Atheism is one thing, and agnosticism is another. And one of the odd quirks of Hitchens era New Atheism and its online successors that continue to this day is that they're really interested in fudging that distinction. I think it's interesting to think about why. So they'll insist that, well, to be an atheist is simply to lack the belief in God. So atheists in the traditional sense are atheists, but agnostics are atheists. If you're some kind of weird logical positivist who thinks that the statements God exists, God does not exist, are equally meaningless, you're an atheist. And this is what I was having a little bit of fun with in the part two, right? The essay that came out today and the title, right? That my dog has many great features. Right? She's a great dog, but I don't really think she's taken an interest in philosophy. And despite her, frequent proximity to conversations about it, and I think it's fairly counterintuitive to call her an atheist, but I mean, she surely lacks belief in God, right? I mean, she does not, it would not be true that my dog that my dog possesses
About
the rock.
mangling the kind of the atheist metaphors and being like, is the teapot that's orbiting Saturn an atheist?
Oh man, I wish I thought to use that in the essay. Yeah, exactly right. Um, it seems like not, and there's a way of there are moves they can make to try to get around some of these counterexamples. Although I don't think any of it's really ultimately very convincing. You can say, well, to be an atheist, you have to be capable of beliefs or have some beliefs,
Right.
but just lack that one. And I think adding that to the definition, I think does make it a bit clunkier and more ad hoc.
I mean, a lot of people would just go, no, actually, The Rock is an atheist.
Yeah, that's the other option. You can just bite the bullet. That's the silliest response is to just say The Rock is an atheist. The slightly less silly response, but I still find pretty unconvincing, to say, well, you have to have some beliefs, but not that one. But hold on, I mean, that might get you on The Rock, but dogs have beliefs. I mean, that's if I the example I use in the essay today is, if I put on my shoes and put the AirPods in my ears, Lucy goes nuts because she will form the belief that we are about to go on a walk. And
there are only beliefs of certain kind to do with immediate appraisal of the current situation. But yeah, there's something going on there, right?
Yeah, so I think we would normally call it, if you want, you could be hard line about this and say, no, you need concepts in a way that you don't have. If you're not capable of processing whatever, to have beliefs, these are just proto beliefs or something, and this is just some weird bit of folk psychology that we all talk that way and think that way, right? That because any normal person would say, oh, she thinks this is about to happen, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they have a so if you want to insist that that non-human animals can't have beliefs, then you can take your stand at that point. I think a slightly more plausible way to do it is to say, well, maybe you have to be able to have the right kinds of beliefs, or you may need to be able to have abstract beliefs or something like that, and just lack this one in particular. But even there, it's well, I don't know, because I think it's not actually that hard to concoct examples of entities that would be capable of having abstract beliefs, but where it just seems ridiculous in much the same way as call my dog an atheist to call them an atheist, right? So it's maybe the simplest example would just be somebody who's I don't know, maybe they grow up in the sort of dystopian novel an evangelical might write, in some super ultra scientific future where it's been 200 years since anybody's even used the word God, and all the old books that mention God have been
I think that's the appeal of this definition, among others, is that you get to claim basically everyone that's ever existed who wasn't a monotheist.
Yeah, right. But that seems a little odd, right? Because if you've never heard the thought, right, it's you're never it does, I have to say, at least to me, seem ridiculous in much the same way as saying that dogs could be atheists, to say that somebody who's just never once thought about it is an atheist.
They're certainly not an atheist anyway, I'm an atheist. That's not what it means for me, But I guess the question is, what exactly is Hitchens' position on this kind of thing? Why
well,
do you
that's it. Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? Because Hitchens, I think, is more than a little inconsistent about this. I spent a lot of time. I mean, I wrote this book about Hitchens. I have 0 books. I did even before that. It's look, I enjoy. Always enjoyed watching him do his thing in debates. For the most part, this one was kind of painful. and and so I've like watched a lot of these over the years, and I think that he kind of wants to have it both ways, and I would argue that more generally his successors tend to kind of want to have it both ways on this, right? On the one hand, they want to say all they mean by atheism is just the lack of belief in God, which I think is I think there are good reasons not to define it that way. We could get into, but they want to say that on the one hand, but on the other hand, they sure talk as if they don't just lack the belief; they affirmatively reject it.
The kind of the good rhetorical move that Hitchens made in the previous essay that you discussed is kind of like even if God existed, it would fucking suck. Like, it's crazy to think there's like a guy who can send me to hell forever, and that doesn't sound like someone who doesn't have a view on the matter, who's just simply lacking the belief.
Yeah, but you can lack a belief in many ways, right? You could just not have thought about it. You could reject the belief. In other words, you think it's not right, or you can neither accept it nor reject it because you haven't, maybe you just haven't thought about it enough, or maybe you have thought about it and you've decided that it's impossible to know, and so you've suspended judgment, or whatever, or you're just not sure yet. But like very clearly, somebody like Christopher Hitchens was not unsure about this. Pretty clearly his position, even if he wasn't always prepared to be, to admit it, was there is no God. I mean, in fact, one of his quips from the atheism era was about the Muslim profession of faith, right? There's no God but God, ended 2 words too late, and it's like, okay, so you clearly believe that. And in fact, in this debate, there's this point in not the Q&A, but this point where they get a chance to sort of cross-examine each other, and William Lane Craig asks him, well, you say that atheism just means the absence of belief in God, but what do you think, right? Do you think there's a God? Are you an atheist in the traditional sense? Are you an agnostic? Are you some kind of weird logical positivist? And Hitchens gives this extremely weird answer where he sort of seems to alternate between all three options in a weird way, right? He starts out by saying, well, there is, I'm not going to try to do the Hitchens accent, but there is no case I know how to, to make that there is no God. It's like, okay, so that sounds like you're not asserting there's no God.
That's for you, bro. I do.
Yeah. Also, if you're going to do a debate on is there a God, you should probably learn what the case is. So he's using his usual line, right? The atheist is just saying that, we're not convinced by the evidence there is a God. But then he, immediately afterwards, he says some stuff that makes it sound, like he thinks that they're, he says atheism is not by itself a belief or a system. It simply says you can get by better, probably, we think, without that assumption. Well, that sort of sounds like he's saying that he does think there is a God, and then he says this weird thing about the statement that God exists being like white noise. I think it's because Craig mentioned the thing about logical positivism and got that in his head, and it has a rhetorical ring to it that sounds good to him. But he clearly doesn't think that, and then
he's incompatible with the whole North Korea thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, clearly he does. It does mean something to him because he thinks he's constantly talking about how there isn't evidence for this, which you wouldn't do if for a claim you didn't understand. He's constantly talking about how it'd be horrible if it were true, which is not something you'd say about a claim you didn't understand. So it's he clearly does understand it. I mean, the white noise thing is weird to say. And even just taking a step back from Hitchens himself, I think this is exactly the kind of performative contradiction on this that is pretty common for internet atheists. That people will sort of say out of one side of their mouth that it's like, oh, I'm not asserting the proposition that there's a God. I'm just saying, I'm just saying that you haven't convinced me there is one. And out of the other side of their mouth, they'll sort of like refer to believe, God as like, an imaginary sky daddy or something like that. And it's like, well, that doesn't sound to me just like somebody who hasn't been convinced. That sounds to me like somebody who actively disbelieves this claim.
Right. And kind of so Hitchens both doesn't give a positive case for atheism, but also doesn't really respond to these big five arguments, but you have, right?
Yeah, so the five arguments that Craig gives, and I mean, it's funny actually when part one they came out, somebody on Twitter was saying like, "Oh, Craig is like Gish Galloping." It's like, no, he's really not, right? He only gives five of them. He like refers back to them and repeats them many times throughout the debate. He gives Hitchens plenty of times to respond to them. He even asks about them individually at some points. It's like so yeah, the five arguments are so the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the moral argument, an argument about the resurrection of Jesus, and an argument about immediate experience of God. So the cosmological and the teleological are the two sort of biggest, kind of most historically important kind of philosophical arguments for the existence of God. Both of them are in
which
one way or another.
gives some reply to, but kind of conflates them.
Yeah, he does kind of conflate them. I think it's pretty clear from his reply that he doesn't quite understand what the difference is. So the cosmological argument is what's also known as the first cause argument. If we sort of figure out what causes the stuff that exists right now, then think about what caused that, and what caused that, and what caused that. It has to trace back to first cause. So Craig says in his initial presentation of this that from nothing, nothing comes. This is the kind of argument that people are making when they like non-philosophers who are kind of trying to intuitively explain why they believe in God. If you ask them and they say, well, something can't come from nothing. That's the argument they're getting at. The teleological argument is the argument from design, and it take a few different forms. Like it's the argument that people, like sometimes like creationists will say things like, oh, if you like a tornado blew through a junkyard, you wouldn't think that it assembled the junk into a Boeing 747 that worked. So, why do you think this random process, random unguided naturalistic processes could generate,
which is
cats and dogs?
Which is one of the titles of Dawkins' God Delusion. He spends a lot of time because obviously, I mean, he's a evolutionary guy, so obviously he's going to know a lot about this kind of thing.
Yeah, which is just as a footnote, I think where Dawkins is at his best. I mean, I think he's a good writer, and he is actually a very gifted like explainer of evolutionary biology. I think he's kind of a disaster on philosophy, but I
mean, he does actually make the normal atheist, theist, agnostic.
That's true. So you got to give him that, right? He's actually
which has this kind of amazing reaction when you point this out to kind of, people, online atheists will be like, Dawkins says this, so we should believe it. And then you say, well, Dawkins is making this distinction that you fail to. And they're like, that's a fucking argument from authority. Like, there's like a severe amount of talking out of both sides of the mouth. But it's interesting the kind of order that William Lane Craig's arguments are in, as you've placed them anyway. Because, I mean, they're basically in descending order of being any good.
I think that's
right. Cosmological and teleological are like, those are like, especially the cosmological, it's probably the best one, really, and like not something you can just dismiss. Teleological is like, I don't believe it, but I can understand. Like, it doesn't make much sense to me, but I can understand why it could. Moral argument, again, isn't convincing for me, but I can see why it would be convincing with someone. But the resurrection of Jesus, that's
Yeah.
fucking shit. Like, what? Like, for that one, like, there's way more attestations of like Allah's grace, I think. So, like,
Yeah, exactly. It's this isn't even something I hit on in the essay, but it's like, but it is. But it's like the fact that he wants to count the that like he wants to put so much weight on like this particular miracle story is kind of amazing because I mean I think I think David Hume like made kind of all the necessary points about this in the Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, including the point that it's like, look, to the extent that a miracle story is evidence in favor of one religion, it's also evidence against other religions that are incompatible with it. So they have a
the in the Islamic version of Jesus, Jesus' story, he doesn't die on the cross.
right.
God
Right.
teleports him out, which is nice of him.
Yeah, that's more considerate.
And then the
Yeah,
immediate experience of God is one which, I mean, actually, it's probably the only point in the order where it's not, because it makes more sense to me than the resurrection of Jesus, but it has that feature of being like something which makes it rational for a particular person to believe something, but
yeah,
no, it's not a general argument. And it's a bit
yeah,
useless, especially to give someone like Christopher Hitchens, who presumably has not had an immediate experience of God.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, my ordering of these arguments would be similar. I think I might flip the first two. So, when we were talking about the teleological argument a minute ago, we were talking about the sort of like kind of the dumbest version of it, right? But to be fair to Craig, the one he gives is, I think, probably the best version of it, which is the fine tuning argument, which says, well, there are this, you sort of fiddle with the dials a little bit at the Big Bang and the sort of basic physical constants. And there are this like unfathomably vast number of potential ways that kinds of universe we could have had, ways the universe could have been. And there is, and almost none of them would have allowed for the existence of life, never mind intelligent life. It's like some really insane number of possibilities. Like it's I don't know. I think one of the essays I was looking at about this, it's like 10 with 60 zeros after it, that kind of thing. And it's
But
like,
there's 100% chance that any intelligent observer is going to be in the very small share of ones which can allow intelligent observers.
yeah, that's certainly true. So I mean, there are responses to that, but I just wanted to say, like, I think that look, I don't find the teleological argument convincing, right? Like, even in the sort of smarter fine tuning version of it, I think essay for today, I sort of go into some detail about why I find it ultimately very unconvincing. But like, I do think just in terms of immediate psychological impact, it's like really kind of marinated in sheer numbers, the sort of like really like contemplating that kind of mind-bending level of improbability, I think is probably, if there was one argument that like again, not on a question of like whether it's persuasive on reflection, but like just kind of immediate psychological impact gave me any kind of pause, that would be it. Whereas the cosmological, it just seems a little bit more obvious to me why, like, again, well, I would say, so the people can look, there's this website called Thousand Word Philosophy, which has some convenient, extremely short essays and some of these things. I was looking last night at the one on fine tuning, and the response there, which it's actually kind of clever to the point about how, until there's 100% chance that intelligent observers are going to find themselves in the universe where that does permit intelligent life. Say, well, okay, but I mean, if there's some crazy thing happens where you're going to be executed by firing squad, it's like every single bullet misses you, and there's some bizarrely improbable thing that happens. The fact that you wouldn't be around to notice if it hadn't happened because you would be dead, doesn't doesn't negate the fact that something astonishingly improbable has happened.
I mean, it also makes me think that kind of people have, a lack of imagination for the conditions under which life could come to be. Obviously, it wouldn't be very much like us, but the only thing that really would mean life couldn't come to be is like if energy was too evenly distributed and there wasn't kind of like points of energy, which I think is a significant part of these universes, which are like kind of mentioned as the ones which would be impossible for life, or those which don't have like concentrated energy.
I mean, I think anything like biological life as we know it, I think to give the argument its due, I think would require beginner's luck at execution, would require that I think it would require physical constants that that are pretty close to what we have. Can't claim to be an expert on this, but that is my sense from reading the stuff. But that said, yeah, I would make 2 points about this. The first is when we take this as evidence for the existence of a creator, we're making a massive assumption that is kind of unearned, which is that if there is a creator, right? If there is, let's say, just some sort of material mind that has this amazing capacity to will a universe into existence, that what that would care about is whether we exist. And I'm not sure why we should assume that, right? I mean, look, our existence is very important to us. They have but that's because we're us. It could be
a kind of anti-fine-tuning argument that if the universe was made for humans, then either we have a very long future ahead of us of going very, very far, or God has a lot of wasted space.
Yeah. So you say that so you could dispute the premise that the universe is fine-tuned for life, and it's like, look, it's sort of fine-tuned for a tiny part of it being temporarily amenable to life, which you say, well, okay, that's I mean, given the presumably unlimited range of options open to an all-powerful being, right? It's like why that, right? Assuming that that's what he cares about. But I think it also sort of underscored a larger point, which is the sort of version of this I did in the debate a couple of years ago with Charlie Kirk was that if you have a deck of 52 cards and you think it's randomly shuffled and you get the 2 of diamonds, you can't say, oh well, there's only 1 in 52 chance that I would get that if it really was randomly shuffled, and there would be a 52 out of 52 chance I would get that if the dealer was cheating to make sure I got it, or almost maybe almost 52. You could mess up. So therefore, the dealer was cheating to make sure I got it. In other words, for any possible version of the universe, you could imagine it could be that there was it was created by a being who wanted that particular version of the universe to come into existence. That the goals that just spin that unfathomably vast wheel of possible universes, and wherever it lands, look, it would be more likely to land there if it were. I mean, it's the same problems with the cards, right? It's like, yeah, any card you got, there only would have been a 1 in 52 chance at. So obviously the fact that you got one in particular doesn't tell you anything about whether or not it was a fair deal. And so similarly, wherever that wheel of possible universes lands, if it were really a random spin, it would be fantastically unlikely that that's the particular one that would land on. Whereas if it were created by a god who really wanted that particular universe to come about, then there would be 100% chance that it would land on it. But it doesn't tell you anything for the same reason. And the reason that might not sound very compelling when we first hear is, well, okay, but come on, I mean, the rest of those universes, there's nothing special about them. If there's something special about this one, it has us in it. And it's like, okay, I mean, kind of get over yourself as a species, right? I mean, that this is like, why, yeah, we think we're special, but then again, we would think that, wouldn't we? Right? It could be that, and especially if you're talking about a infinite, immaterial, eternally existing mind, what makes you think that we would have any insight into what that mind cared about? That they have it could be, you could, like, why is it more plausible that there was a god who wanted intelligent life to exist, that there was a god who cared above all else that the number of particles of space dust was a number, or that there was some particular kind of black hole that can't exist in our universe.
Maybe he's a paperclip maximizer, and what he just set up humanity so that we could maximize paperclips.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like there's nothing like there's like, it's kind of weird, right? It's like same way I don't think my dog really understands what I'm talking to you about right now. It's like, look, I mean, the gap between Lucy's mind and mine is nothing compared to my mind versus the all-knowing creator of the universe. So it's like, yeah, why should I think I would have any insight? I mean, this is a point that theists themselves often make when it's convenient to them, right?
Right.
That like, why should you think that you have any insight into what sort of goals that being would care about? And just if we're just thinking about the basic concept of an infinite immaterial mind capable of bringing universes into being, who knows what it's into? So that's one point. Second point is, let's assume for the sake of argument that intelligent life really is important. That if there's a God, intelligent life is what it cares about. I think that's a wholly arbitrary assumption, but let's just go ahead and make it. Okay. So, and maybe you could even go with the sort of traditional explanation of this, that what God ultimately cares about is that there are, created beings with minds that can, freely come to know him and be in communion with him and all that stuff, right? That extremely culturally specific story. Let's say it's true. All right. Friend Neil Sidibabu has this wonderful paper called Divine Fine-Tuning versus Electrons in Love, where he makes the point that there is a really odd fit between the idea that like biological life would have to be possible in order for there to be beings who freely came to know God and love God and all that stuff, and something else that theists generally believe. In fact, something else that arguably theists have to believe in order to be theists, which is dualism about minds and bodies. That if you believe that, you and I are not, what you see there, the YouTube split screen, right? That what we really are is immaterial souls that just happen to be hooked up to these bodies that you see on the YouTube split screen. And in fact, that will continue to exist long after those bodies have crumbled into dust. Then look, if God wants there to be things in the universe that know him and love him, wait, why can't he give immaterial souls to black holes? Why can't he? I mean, look, wherever that wheel of universes stops spinning, you could have in that universe sentient electrons that knew and loved God, and so it seems like
electrons are like perfect and immortal and unscarable, which makes them so much better than us.
Yeah, and if all you need is like and maybe it's important that we are, scarable, that, that we, I don't know, we gain spiritual insight from the scarred or whatever, fine, right? But it's like, look, you can, there are plenty of, um, God can definitionally do whatever, right? He can make, some sort of configuration of electrons in a universe with physical laws unfathomably unlike ours. Be capable of being scarred if he wants to be scarred. If he wants them to be scarred, there's no problem with that. Or they can just, hey, maybe electrons are, maybe sentient electrons are just constantly emotionally scarring each other by saying very hurtful things. Having painful electron breakups and stuff like that. But yeah, I think so. So ultimately, I think that there's like the teleological argument, even in the best version of it, which he ultimately gives, is based on some really arbitrary assumptions. I just think there's no reason to think either that God would care above all else about, it's like, again, it's so kind of magnificently self-involved that we assume the infinite immaterial creator of the universe cares above all else about whether we exist and whether we like him. But then like then the cosmological argument,
right? Because I was going to say, like, the cosmological argument does really tickle my brain, and I find the secular, atheist, whatever explanations for how things began to be very unsatisfying, maybe. And it feels like a question where the answer just might be unsatisfying. But for me, it really does kind of, ignoring everything else, it seems more sensible in a lot of ways than the other answer. So why does it not tickle your brain? Because apparently it doesn't, while the theological one does.
Yeah, right. I think it just seems so obvious to me that, okay, let me back up. I think one way of sort of getting the brain tickling going as best it can is to think like, you think about the universe having always existed, and that seems really, there's something about that you're like, even if it's really hard to articulate what's wrong with it, that like you can sort of feel your brain rebelling against that idea somehow, right? That seems like something off about it. And so you think, okay, well, if it began, then it has to, like, is it just going to pop into existence out of, with no cause? I mean, that is really counterintuitive. And so yeah, I mean, I kind of get how your brain can get tickled by it. I think maybe just in this case, it was sort of the right answer to this seemed clear enough to me long enough ago. Like I've sort of, my brain has settled into a very untickled groove about it over the years, that like, so basically, so two things, right? One, it's like, yeah, if you let yourself sit with the thought of the universe having always existed, there is something that's very intuitively weird about that. But if you start thinking about the universe starting to exist, and you really let yourself sit with that thought, that also seems super weird, right? I mean, like if you say like time began, right? There's like a first moment of time. Like I think the more you sit with that, the more intuitively bizarre it sounds. And I think it could just be that this is I think we might be running into a limitation of our puny monkey brains here that like, that it's like, yeah, thinking about any, like, look, logically, there are only a very small number of options that could be right here, and all of them seem intuitively bizarre. I think you could, I think it is a strategy that works for some people to make it feel less bizarre by sort of associating it with things that make you feel these feelings of numinousness and transcendence and all that, right? But it's like, I think that's just kind of a cheat code, right? I mean, like it doesn't really do anything. It's like that's just a way of saying that. That's a way of like that's like a way of evading these feelings of intuitive oddness about these possibilities. So that's one thing. That's just But then like on the argument itself, always seem like, look, if you say something can't come from nothing, and to be fair, what I'm about to give isn't quite the version Craig does. We can do Craig's version in like 30 seconds. But like, if you say something can't come from nothing, say, well, why not? Right? Like, why can't something come from nothing? You say, well, everything has to have a cause. Then, well, if everything has to have a cause, then God would need to have a cause. I mean, like, if everything has to have a cause, there can't be a first cause. There's this thing I used to do. We were talking about this in classes where I would like draw like 3 diagrams on the board, and one of them is, a line with, on the left end, there's just an arrow pointed backwards, right? So to represent like, here's a chain of causes that just goes back forever. One of them, there's a clear starting point, and then one of them, they like go around in a loop, like, the plot of the first Terminator movie. There's a causal loop. I say, okay, if the idea that everything has a cause is supposed to get us to the one where there's a clear starting point, something's gone very wrong, because that's the only one that's not compatible with the principle that everything has to have a cause. Because they're all the rest of them, everything has a cause, right? Like even in a causal loop, right? If A is caused by B and B is caused by C and C is caused by A, well, all those things have causes. Certainly in an infinite chain, right? Every link in the infinite chain is caused by the one before it. The only one where there's something without a cause is the one where there's a first cause, because a first cause is by definition an uncaused cause. And if you say, well, even if there's an infinite one, this is like kind of the Leibniz version of the cosmological argument, even if there's an infinite chain of causes, you need something that explains why the whole chain exists. And so, well, now you've just made this what causes God problem even more severe, because if your demand for causes is so demanded that's not even good enough for every link in the chain, the whole chain has to. Now I really don't know what gets God off the hook for needing a cause. And,
I mean, but does the argument not kind of go the other way? Like, I feel like people do the same thing in the much maligned ontological argument, where people will say, like, you're just kind of saying that there's God, and then you say there's a feature of God, and that makes God true. Well, that's not exactly how the ontological argument goes, which is to say you first think about what would be the right sort of being. And so the point with the cosmological argument is to say, okay, there must have been a first cause who was an uncaused cause. And then you think about the features of how such a being would be, and you're meant to get to the end result of God.
Yeah. So the problem that I presented here is a problem for thinking there could be a first cause at all before we even start thinking about whether that first cause would be God exactly. So if the reason for thinking there's a first cause is that everything has to have a cause, then it's incoherent, because the first cause would be an uncaused cause. Now,
but like you can say that everything has a cause apart from one thing, like.
Yeah, but then why should I think that? Like, in other words, like it's like the original version has a certain ring of plausibility to it. But if you say, well, everything except for this,
well, I don't know. Like, to me, it makes sense to like not really, but like to say, everything will have a cause apart from the very first thing, and the first thing must be uncaused because it's the first thing. So, what would be the nature such that a being could be uncaused?
But if you get to have, but if you say it has to be uncaused because it's the first thing, then you've granted the things that are uncaused, and it seems to me that we're off the hook. I should say, so to be totally fair about this, the version of the argument I've been attacking for the last few minutes is a simplification. Usually, when people actually give and to be fair, it's kind of the simplification that Craig does in the debate with Hitchens. But even if you look at his, because he just kind of says, "Well, from nothing, nothing comes," or whatever. But like, even if you look at Craig's own written work, then he does. Then he does give. I think he does do a little bit better than either saying everything has to have a cause, which would be obviously self-refuting, or everything but God has a cause, which, I guess we disagree about this a little bit, but that seems awfully arbitrary to me. What he does, and I think this is fair as far as it goes, is say nothing nothing can begin to exist without a cause. And that, I think, to give it its due, sounds pretty reasonable, right? It's like, yeah, nothing can begin to exist without a cause. I mean, if I'm holding up my, actually, let's do the, holding up the phone with this hand. This hand's empty. And then, as you're watching, a identical phone comes into existence in this hand. You'd be very confused about what had just happened. Right. And you really want an explanation. You wouldn't say, if I said, sometimes things just come into existence without causes, I don't think you'd accept that, right? So there is something, I think, to be said for his version of the principle. But then the question is, well, why should we think that, the first question is, why should we think the physical universe isn't, comes into existence? Why should you think that it hasn't always existed? And there are a couple of answers you can give to that. One of them is to appeal to Big Bang physics. And that's probably the best answer, although it's also maybe less decisive than people think it is, because that, if you actually start to look into the details a little bit of like different cosmological models in physics, the idea that our universe is the only universe and our Big Bang is the only bang and all of that is certainly not universally held, right? So, and it's very hard to test this stuff, but they have there are.
I mean, my current impression is that physicists don't even think of the Big Bang as like the start of the universe, but rather it's just kind of like the blinding point, where because of how it worked, we can't see anything before.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there are different, models of this, and I certainly wouldn't claim to be any kind of expert on this stuff, but I do, there's, there are oscillating universes views where you have like, our Big Bang was the big crunch of some previous version of the universe. That so it just goes around in a cycle. There's stuff that's much weirder and harder to understand than that when you get into like multiverses and bubble universes and all that stuff, which I don't fully understand. But all of which is to say, though, that it's like I think that just leaning on Big Bang physics might not get it done here, right? Like I think that there's enough ambiguity there. There are enough models where, as you say, that it's not the total beginning of all physical reality. That I think the idea of physical reality being in some sense eternally pre-existent is still very much on the table. So you need some other reason to reject that, and Craig does give another reason. In fact, this is a depressingly large number of years ago. I feel very old thinking about this. When I was applying to PhD programs, my writing sample was actually about this. It was about, because I'd taken my master's program, I'd taken this independent study with Quentin Smith about this book that he'd written of battling essays he and Craig had written on this exact topic. It's called Theism, Atheism, and Big Bang Cosmology. And so, in those Craig essays, he talks, he appeals, so what he's giving is a version of the Kalam cosmological argument, which comes from medieval Islamic philosophy, and what the Kalam thinkers emphasized was this neo-Aristotelian idea that you can't have actual infinities, that infinity is like a useful mathematical abstraction, but you can't have an infinite quantity of anything in real life. And this is supposed to be shown, this is actually a level of detail I do not get into because it's already very long without it. So I sort of consciously, went without and gave like a very, very short version of all this. But it's like, what the cosmological argument, the traditional move is to say, appeal to these so-called paradoxes of actual infinity, and say that like a simple one is like, imagine an infinite library, and to make it easier to imagine, let's say every other book in the infinite library is a red cover and every other book in the infinite library is a black cover. So it goes red book, black book, red book, black book into infinity. Somebody checks a book out of the infinite library. You still have exactly as many books as you did before, because infinity minus one is infinity. It's even an infinity if you know a little bit of the math here. If you don't, do not worry about it. It's even an infinity if the same cardinality, right? The same size of infinity, which is the thing mathematicians talk about. So and that's weird. That sort of violates our sense of how reality should work, that you could check a book out of the library and there's still exactly as many books as there were before. And then, and that's like slightly weird. And like an industrial strength weird example is Hilbert's Hotel, which is a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and every single room is occupied. And a new person comes out of the cold and asks the night manager at the infinite hotel, do you have any rooms for tonight? He says, oh, no problem. And what he does is he moves the guy who was in room 1 into room 2. He moves the guy who just came in into room 1. Guy who was in room 2 goes to room 3. Guy who was in room 3 goes to room 4. Guy who was in room 300 trillion goes into room 300 trillion and 1. And if what you're imagining when you hear this is a process that goes on forever of everybody shifting one room down, it just never stops, right? They just keep shifting forever. Then you haven't even wrapped your mind around how weird this is yet, because we could just equip our thought experiment with an infinite PA system where the night manager can communicate with everybody in every room all at once and say, okay, everybody, you've got 5 minutes. We're doing it again. Somebody new came in. Everybody has 5 minutes, the next 5 minutes to move to the next room. And in 5 minutes, the process is done. Everybody is bedded down tight, and nobody has to share a room. Nobody has to sleep outside. That's incredibly weird. That seems really wrong. So these are the kinds of things they point to as paradoxes of actual infinity. And they say, well, if there can't be actual infinities, if the universe had always existed, that would be an actual infinity, like an actually infinite amount of time. And there can't be one of those. Therefore, the universe must have come into exist. The universe must have begun to exist, and since nothing could begin to exist without a cause, therefore the universe must have had a cause. So there are a few, I think, ways you could respond to this, and I don't even get into my response to this I give a very short version of my response to this in the essay. I might do one at some point in the future that's like just about this argument, but I think the very short version is, I think that this sort of what caused God actually kind of reasserts itself here, because you could say, okay, but did God always exist? Right? And if God did always,
God is meant to be infinite in various ways, right?
Yeah, well, that's also true. That's also something in that paper back in 2005. I had that's also something I pointed out in there. That's like, come on, isn't God supposed to have lots of infinite properties? What are you talking about, right? But it's like, and then like also, yeah, there you go. Also, even if God always existed, then that sounds like if it's impossible for the universe to always exist, why is it possible for God to have always existed? If God did begin to exist, then God needs a cause. Some theists think they can get around this by saying, well, God is outside of time, which is its own can of worms. But I would also just say, Quentin Smith, who I mentioned, like my own line on this is to push back on the argument and say, no, this is actually not a good argument for there being a first cause. But Quentin Smith, who I mentioned a minute ago, has like a kind of amazing response to it that's different, which is to say, yeah, look, we could just accept that this is a perfect argument for a first cause and no good objections to it. Fine. But that the Big Bang singularity could just be that first cause. Like why not? Right? It's in fact it even has some of the properties that God is supposed to have. That it doesn't have extension in space. It's sort of outside of time originally. So yeah, I think for a lot of reasons I don't find the cosmological. In fact, like I think both teleological and cosmological, I think there are good objections to, and I'm very convinced by those objections. I think in the cosmological case, maybe even slightly more so. But I think where we do agree, those are the two real arguments. The other, like those are like actually interested arguments to think about and respond to and all that stuff. The other three are just kind of bullshit.
Yeah, and I wanted to, before we get towards the end, and hopefully we have some decent time on this, is to say that, cosmological argument, maybe if I was just like 50-50, default 50-50 Bayesian, the others don't really move me, but maybe like the teleological moves me 1%, and then the cosmological moves me 5% towards God or something. So I'm very slightly leaning towards theism or something. And then the argument from evil comes along, and I'm 100% atheism, right? And I think this is the big problem that you might see if like Hitchens, you fail to make a positive argument, which he almost does with the whole North Korea thing, but doesn't seem to understand that that's what he's doing. That with the argument from evil for me basically rules out. Based on the argument from evil, I'm like more confident that God doesn't exist than I am about like normal kind of things like, that this laptop is in front of me, that I'm speaking to you, that I'm hallucinating. It's much more plausible to me that I'm hallucinating this whole conversation than that there's never been a single instance of gratuitous evil in the history of the universe.
Yeah, that seems right to me. So, because like that is really what you need to say, right? So I think probably most people interested enough in philosophy to watch this know this, but just to like run through it for like 30 seconds, like the sort of basic shape of the argument is, a lot of theists will tell you that what they mean by God is a being with these specific properties, who's all PKG, right? All powerful, all knowing, all good, and that they, in order to be what they mean by God, you have to be all those things. And it's like, well, if so, probably then the existence of apparently suffering, right, unjustified bad things happening, is enough to show that there is no such God. I mean, this is like the my friend Warren, who wrote an essay. I'm probably going to write something about at some point in the future about Sam Harris's metaethics. But he's a philosophy professor in college in New York. He has he has a line that I've been quoting for many years about this, where it's like he's like, look, if you tell me that there's an invisible giant who's walking around all day painting the sky yellow, my first question would even be, where's the evidence that there's such a giant? My first question would be, why is the sky yellow? Right. So if you say there is a all-powerful being who's also infinitely benevolent, then first question won't even be, where's your evidence for that? My first question will be, why is the universe the way it is? You wouldn't think it would be if that's the case, right? That they have it's like thinking that there is a there's a novel by Ian Banks called The Crow Road, where there's a minor character in it who has so it's the main character. Yes, the main character's dad is this sort of like crotchety old communist atheist guy, and there's like a this like woman in his town or whatever who's like stopped believing in God when her husband like got cancer or something and died, and like he's talking about that. And he's like, wait, does she not know about the Holocaust? Like this is like new information, right? Like this is like it's like there's an awful lot of things that happen that sure seem like a even slightly benevolent being would want to stop, right? A even morally okay being would want to not happen, and surely an all-powerful being would be able to prevent. And there are all sorts of moves that theists have for trying to explain all this away. But, like I really like the way you just put it, because like what you have to believe to think that it has been explained away is that there has never been anything that's ever happened that's bad that didn't, need to happen because of this greater justification, right? So like William Rowe has this classic paper, I think it's called The Tongue of Evil, The Varieties of Atheism. I'm getting that title slightly wrong, where he has this he has an example about like a forest fire where like a deer like burns alive in the forest fire, and it's like, and nobody's around, there are no humans around to like learn anything from it, right? It just like happens in the middle of the forest. And it's like, that is a hell of a thing to deny ever happens, right? Like, it's like that, like, yeah, I mean, that definitely
right. The example I gave a few weeks ago was, a baby being born to like a dying mother in the desert. She dies and passes away, and then the baby dies and passes away, and its bones are lost in the shifting sands of the desert forever.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, you have to believe that like nothing like that ever happens. And it's like, well, come on. I mean, surely, that is a lot harder to believe than that I'm like in this conversation right now. I remember to the chat point, there's
and that baby was unbaptized too, so it's in for some fucking purgatory or whatever.
Yeah, there you go. James Morrow is this novel called Blameless in Abaddon, where there are, talking about the problem of evil, and one of the characters says this, the idea that like, you suffer in this life and then you're rewarded in heaven, and that makes it okay, is a little bit like saying you can molest your kids if you take them to Disneyland later. Right, and
God doesn't play dice. He's not a consequentialist, is he?
Yeah, well, that's the like, you have to have some real, like, in order to believe that a morally perfect being would allow all this stuff. So like there is a point where it comes up in the debate. Hitchens never brings it up because he's, he thinks he doesn't need to make a positive case, but like a student brings it up in the Q&A at the very end. And Craig says a bunch of things that I think don't really answer the nub of the problem. But one of them is like, well, it could be that in order for people to freely come to choose God and all that, you need a world that's suffused with both natural and moral evil. And it's like, I think there are about 100 problems with that, but one of the more obvious ones, I would think, is, well, this is some real steely-eyed, harvest the organs from innocent people so that, slightly fewer people died kind of consequentialism going on. That like, this is what you have to think morality is in order to think that a morally perfect being would be okay
basically,
with that.
if God's a consequentialist, then you're wrong, William Lane Craig, about what is moral, and so is your church, and so is the Catholic Church, blah blah blah, right?
Yeah, and also certainly,
because if God's a consequentialist, you have to be too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and look, I'm not very sympathetic to utilitarianism, but it's like to give utilitarians their credit. I don't think a utilitarian dog would just saw the chat, so I said dog. A utilitarian God would.
No, because I mean, it amounts to the same thing, right? Because consequentialists say, "Oh, you can let bad things happen because they aren't infinitely powerful," right?
Yeah, exactly.
If they were infinitely powerful, they could just stop both bad things.
Yeah, and certainly like everything that Craig believes about people being punished for their sins by going to hell forever and all that stuff would be totally unjustifiable in terms of consequentialist morality. And also, you're right. I mean, it's like even the consequentialist greater good stuff just doesn't really have any teeth here, because anytime you're saying, well, God has to allow X in order to bring about Y greater good. Well, look, we have to allow X or do X in order to bring about Y all the time, right? I mean, because we're beings of limited power. So if we want to accomplish some goal, we're very often in the situation where we have to do it indirectly. We have to do something else to bring it about. So we're used to thinking that way. But an all-powerful being, anything that's logically possible, it could just will into existence. That's what all-powerful means, So it's like you don't actually have to, I mean, you could just, if you want people to, if it's very important to you for some reason, and from a consequentialist perspective, I'm not sure why it is, but it's very important to you for some reason that people come to, know you and love you as God, then okay, great. Just, take the, just like hardwire them to do that, right? There's no and it's certainly, I don't know what the utilitarian justification is for like saying, oh, they have to do it freely. That's that seems like a completely different
right. Normally, the point of consequentialism is the opposite, where you're like, this might lead to being too authoritarian. While it seems if God exists, he's very, just lets us get on with it. Which is
exactly
the problem of divine hiddenness, right?
Yeah, totally.
Which is, why, if God exists, does he just not make it really obvious?
Yeah.
Do we want to do 2 minutes on naturalism, the argument from naturalism, before we finish?
Sure. I would also say, by the way, that like for if you're good. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that the existence of apparently undeserved suffering is as powerful evidence against the existence of God anything could be as evidence against anything. I think honestly that's the gold standard of evidence, if by God you mean what classical theists say they mean. If you're willing to say, well, this means some sort of immaterial mind with this amazing ability to bring the universe into existence, then problem of evil doesn't give you a positive case against the existence of that. But I do still think there's a positive case for the against the existence of that. It's just like you kind of referenced it earlier with the joke about Russell's teapot, right? It's if I say if I say that right now in the palm of my hand there is a tiny invisible leprechaun that's dancing around, singing Danny Boy at a frequency that human ears can't hear, and if you go like this, the leprechaun will use magical powers to get out of the way, then you wouldn't be an agnostic about that. Like you wouldn't reserve judgment about whether or not there's a leprechaun. You would believe that there was not one, which I think is perfectly reasonable.
It's kind of one of the moves that online atheists make when they say, well, I can't be an atheist in the sense of saying God doesn't exist, because what do you even mean by God? And there's so many varieties of God and whatever. But I really find that whole thing just not really line up, because literally most of humanity believes in the Abrahamic God, and there isn't kind of that much debate about his kind of absolute nature in the sense of being all loving and blah 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 and all powerful and all knowing. So it's like the kind of like, okay, yeah, I don't really not believe in Thor, though I guess if I thought about it I wouldn't, but like Why are we worrying about that? Like, the conversation that's actually being had on the internet is between people who believe in the Abrahamic God and people who don't. So why are you
Yeah.
talking about
Why not just come right out and admit that you disbelieve in the Abrahamic God? Which, by the way, you know, like, yes, people often who've never thought about this will explain what atheism means by saying, well, atheists are people who don't believe in God. And that's some evidence, I suppose, for the definition that I've been criticizing today. But I'd also point out that if you think about it for 10 seconds, in lots of other contexts, look, the English phrase "I do not believe" is ambiguous. Taken literally, it just means I lack the belief. But in a variety of contexts that have nothing to do with this one, it's used to convey I believe the negation of, right? I believe, I actively disbelieve, right? If I say, if I'm debating a libertarian, I say I don't believe your theory of property rights, everybody would understand me to be indicated that I believe that it's not true. There's a, if I tell you some fantastical story about a thing I said happened to me, and you say I don't believe you, I would understand you to be saying that you believe that what I'm saying is false, right? That's the way that the phrase "don't believe" often, not always, but it's context dependent, but it often works. But yeah, I mean, so I think it is. So I agree with you, and I think that response is sufficient. That you can just say that if what we're talking about, which we usually are, is the Abrahamic God, right? The problem of evil is sufficient. But even if we're talking more generally about, like, let's say that there's something that's like what people are usually talking about when they talk about God, but maybe without the moral goodness or whatever. I think it's an interesting question whether we should be an agnostic about that. And I don't even think we should be, right? Because, the saw somebody in the chat saying about the leprechaun example, is that just an argument from ignorance? I think the thing that makes it not an argument from, like, an argument from ignorance is where you're saying, well, we don't have evidence for X, so I'm going to believe not X. And it's like, yes, that by itself is fallacious, because it could be that you just don't have good evidence one way or the other. But I do think ontological simplicity arguments are some evidence in themselves, that all else being equal, the simpler picture is.
Well, I mean, very conveniently, the argument of from naturalism applies here, right?
Okay, so very good. Let's do that.
That the reason I don't believe in very, very, very small invisible leprechauns is that by all known physical laws and all known kind of facts we know about the world, you can't have tiny invisible leprechauns. And it also rules out any God, because basically the point of naturalism is to say everything that we've found and we have strong evidence of follows a single set of natural laws, the laws of physics, and we have reason to believe that everything that exists on this basis is natural. And that says, it rules out all supernatural things. And this is the answer to the atheist being like, well, I don't know what you're saying. Like, can I rule out Thor? Like, how could I rule out all possible gods? But exactly the argument for naturalism rules out all possible gods, unless, by God you mean something which is actually natural, in which case it's like,
it sounds like you're using the word in a very non-standard way at that point. Yeah.
And they're just aliens at that point.
Yeah, which I guess is, to be fair, is kind of what Thor is in the MCU. So, yeah. If you mean the Thor that Vikings worshipped, not the Thor of the movies.
Oh, the Thor of Stargate SG-1.
Okay, got me beat there. I'm not familiar with that, but yeah, first couple of Thor movies, very tedious. Thor Ragnarok was fun. I like that. But anyway, I think, I think that might be kind of a variation, or maybe like a sort of different way of framing something like the same point, that that it's like, it could be that there are supernatural there are supernatural, um, entities. Um, it's not, logically impossible, but I mean, if we're comparing a naturalistic account of the universe where there aren't any to one where there is one, then again, all else being equal, the one that doesn't require us to add a radically different kind of thing to the kinds of things that we actually have evidence for is a more plausible explanation. It's I think in terms of explanatory simplicity and all of that, it wins, right? Which is again like this is, I mean, in any ordinary non-philosophical context, 100 out of 100 people would actively disbelieve me about the leprechaun, right? They would form the belief that it was not there. And also 100 out of 100 people say, how am I supposed to rule out Thor? Not like to the extent that it's crossed their mind, they immediately form the belief that there is no Thor.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
there is no real person. Like the person does not exist who is an adamant atheist about the Abrahamic God, but is on the fence about Thor. I suppose historically there might have been a time when there was such a person, but not right now.
I've forgotten how to. I wanted to show Thor from our Stargate SG-1, but I've forgotten how to do it on Restream. Oh wait, I've worked it out. All right, there. That's what Thor looks like in Stargate SG-1.
All right, not Chris Edward.
It's like a all myths are real setting. I'm shocked you don't know about Stargate SG-1. It's like a 1990s sci-fi action show.
Yeah, that does sound like it'd be up my alley. I mean, I watched the original movie many, many, many years ago, Stargate, but I never watched the show or shows. I'm not sure. The only actually, I think the only science fiction show I was really watching in the '90s, like the X-Files. I think, I mean, as far as I can recall. I mean, I guess that was it. I mean, I can remember. I mean, in the '90s, I can remember they'd show these like ancient Star Trek reruns.
Right.
Watch those, but that's about it.
Okay, clearly you're not the audience.
RB, yes, I have.
What was I going to ask earlier? Oh, I've forgotten. Oh well. Should we end?
Yeah. Let's end. So I should say we are not going to be doing one of these next week because I'm going to be traveling, but there will be an essay on the Substack next week.
Oh yeah, what's the essay? That's a question I asked.
Yeah, it's going to be about that would make sense. It's going to be about Noam Chomsky's comments on ChatGPT and
oh, cool.
And basically the possibility of strong artificial intelligence. So yeah.
Okay, we definitely need to do.
Yeah, maybe we could.
Even if and not to skimp on it.
Maybe we could do it at a. Maybe we could just find a different day to do it or something. But yeah, sure, that sounds good.
I'm planning on writing another essay about ChatGPT for Sublation soon.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah.
Which I'll probably do next Sunday. So I'll just do fucking this.
Yeah, there you go. Speaking of Sublation, they're on. So usually Sunday is my busiest day because I teach this capital class in the morning. We're actually almost done with the book now, but I teach a capital class in the morning, and then an hour after it's done, we do this, and then an hour and a half or so afterwards, I do my college show. But since next Sunday I'm not going to be able to do any of those things, and contraction, I do have to do a college show every week, and I wanted to do this one in any case. So I should say on this coming Thursday, so a non-standard time, I am going to be doing a call-in, and who is the guest going to be on that call-in?
Is it me?
It is you, yes. It is you.
Exciting.
Yes. So talking about another thing that you wrote for Substack magazine, I think it's called
About
Money and More.
morality. And
Yes, Money and Moralism or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's money over moralism.
Money over moralism. So yeah, tune into that, and I guess while we're plugging things, I am finally going to be back on the main show tomorrow. I've been taking the last couple of weeks off of that, but tomorrow night on GTA, I am going to be interviewing Justin Clark, who is a Marxist who wrote a interesting essay reviewing a book by somebody who's leaving the Church of Scientology, and it is just a good excuse to watch some, to like delve into the fascinating weirdness of those people. So that is going to be talking Scientology on GTA tomorrow night.
Cool. Well, let's knock off.
All right, sounds good.
Wait, no, I haven't got the graphic ready. Okay, let's knock off.
There you go.